You were not born weak. No child enters the world asking permission to exist. Yet somewhere between childhood and adulthood, something silent begins rewriting the operating system of your mind. You start watching faces before you speak. You start adjusting your opinions before you even understand them. Every decision quietly passes through an invisible checkpoint. One question begins ruling everything. What will they think? You do not notice when it begins. It happens gradually. A teacher's disapproval, a group laughing when someone says the wrong thing, a workplace where the loudest voice wins the room. Your brain learns a dangerous survival pattern. Do not offend. Do not stand out too much. Do not risk embarrassment. Protect your social position at all costs. And slowly, without realizing it, you trade autonomy for approval. Your brain begins negotiating every move. Should you speak up in that meeting? Should you say what you really believe? Should you post that idea, or start that project, challenge that authority? The mind pauses, scans the room, predicts reactions. Praise becomes a reward. Criticism becomes a threat. What you call personality is often just negotiation. Modern neuroscience quietly confirms this pattern. Researchers studying status threat responses have observed something unsettling. When the brain believes social rejection is possible, it burns enormous energy calculating safe behavior. Instead of acting decisively, you start performing. But you begin living as a version of yourself designed for other people's comfort. But there was a time in history when this behavior would have meant death. In feudal Japan, hesitation could get a warrior killed. A samurai stepping into a duel could not afford the luxury of wondering what others thought of him. A mind tangled in approval-seeking would freeze, and in a world ruled by swords, hesitation was fatal. So Japanese warriors developed a psychological discipline designed to eliminate this weakness entirely. It was called Fudoshin, the immovable mind. Fudoshin is not motivation. It is not confidence. It is not positive thinking. It is something far more ruthless. It is the complete removal of psychological dependence on approval, praise, criticism, and social judgment. The mind becomes still, unmoved, not arrogant, not emotional, simply unaffected. When the system works, or your decisions stop belonging to the crowd, they belong to you. But there is a reason very few people ever achieve it. Because Fudoshin cannot be added to the person you currently are. It replaces him. The identity built on validation must collapse first. The personality trained to scan the room must be dismantled. The version of you that seeks reassurance, applause, permission, that version cannot survive inside an immovable mind. And when that collapse begins, something terrifying happens. Most people run, because the moment you stop seeking approval, the world reacts. Friends become uncomfortable. Colleagues become suspicious. Familiar dynamics break. The social fabric that once protected you begins pulling away. The approval that once felt like oxygen suddenly disappears, and the question becomes unavoidable. When the crowd stops validating you, who are you without them? The question is where this story begins, because one ordinary man was forced to answer it the hard way, and the moment that forced him to face it came in the worst possible place. A room full of witnesses, where approval turned into humiliation, and the identity he spent years protecting collapsed in front of everyone. The moment you are about to see is not rare. It happens in offices, in classrooms, in friendships, in families. But when it happens, most people bury the memory and return to negotiation. He did something different, and that decision began a psychological war inside his own mind. a war that ancient Japanese philosophy has been preparing men for nearly 800 years. But before that transformation can begin, you need to do something most people avoid. You must make your first declaration. Before the story continues, stop for a moment and do something deliberate. This is not a casual video. What you are about to watch is a psychological mirror. If the pattern described in the opening felt familiar, then the system you are about to see is not just a story. It is a challenge directed at you. So mark the beginning of this moment with a small act of commitment. Subscribe to the channel if you want more stories built around ancient Japanese systems of mental discipline and inner mastery. These are not motivational speeches. They are examinations of the invisible habits shaping modern identity. Then, like the video, not as a gesture of approval, but as a signal that these ideas deserve to reach others who are still trapped in the quiet addiction to validation. And most importantly, write a declaration in the comments, not a long explanation, just a single sentence. I stopped seeking approval today. Write it exactly like that. Because once a statement becomes public, something powerful happens in the human mind. You are no longer negotiating privately with yourself. Your words exist outside you, visible to others. And the brain treats public commitments differently. They become contracts with your future behavior. Later, when hesitation appears, when your mind whispers that you should soften your voice or hide your opinion, that sentence will still exist in the open, a reminder that the negotiation already ended. Now, the story can begin. Because the man who discovered this system did not learn it in a monastery or a dojo, he learned it in a fluorescent-lit office conference room. And the moment that changed everything started quietly, with a man named Daniel Sato. Daniel Sato was not the kind of man people noticed. At 34, his life followed a predictable pattern. Every morning at 6:45, his phone alarm vibrated on a nightstand beside a neatly folded pair of work clothes. He lived alone in a modest apartment outside the city center. The furniture was practical, the walls mostly empty. Nothing chaotic, nothing bold. His routine was quiet. Coffee brewed, shower, undress, commute. By 8:30, he was sitting at a gray desk in the operations department of a mid-sized corporate office. His job title sounded respectable: project coordinator. In reality, it meant managing spreadsheets, updating timelines, and sitting through meetings where louder personalities controlled the conversation. On paper, Daniel's life was stable. He paid his bills. He went to the gym 3 nights a week, though most sessions ended after 30 minutes on a treadmill while he watched muted television screens mounted on the wall. On weekends, he sometimes met co-workers for drinks, where conversations stayed comfortably shallow. Nothing about his life appeared broken. But beneath that stability, something subtle controlled nearly every decision he made. Approval. It governed the tone of his voice, the pace of his speech, the way he nodded when others talked. Daniel had developed a quiet reflex that most people never notice in themselves. Before expressing an opinion, his mind scanned the room. Who agrees? Who might disagree? Who has more authority? By the time he finished calculating the answer, the moment to speak usually passed. Inside meetings, Daniel often felt ideas forming. He could see inefficiencies in project timelines. He noticed mistakes before others mentioned them. But the thoughts rarely left his mouth. Instead, he performed a safer behavior. He nodded. "Yeah, that makes sense," he would say. It was not cowardice in the dramatic sense. Daniel did not feel afraid. He simply felt cautious, professional. At least that was the word he used when explaining it to himself. Professional meant not causing tension. Professional meant avoiding conflict. Professional meant maintaining harmony in the room. But beneath those explanations, another mechanism was operating. When Stanford behavioral researchers describe it as status threat monitoring. When the brain perceives a risk of social judgment, it begins calculating protective behavior. Every expression, every sentence, every posture becomes a small negotiation designed to preserve social standing. The brain burns enormous energy predicting reactions. Daniel did this constantly. If a coworker criticized an idea, Daniel quickly adjusted his position. If the manager seemed enthusiastic about a strategy, or Daniel reinforced it. If someone joked about a mistake, Daniel laughed, even when the humor felt uncomfortable. It was subtle, and because everyone around him behaved similarly, it felt normal. During meetings, he often kept a pen in his hand, tapping it softly against his notebook while others talked. The tapping gave him something to do while his mind ran silent calculations. Speak or stay quiet. Agree or disagree. Risk attention or remain invisible. Most days he chose invisibility. After work, he sometimes replayed conversations in his head during the drive home. I should have said something there. Why didn't I mention that? The thought would linger for a few seconds before fading beneath routine distractions. Dinner. Emails. Another episode of whatever series auto-played on his television. Life moved forward. But slowly, something else was happening beneath the surface. Each small moment of silence reinforced the same pattern. But each avoided disagreement made the next one easier. Each act of quiet compliance trained the mind to value comfort over clarity. The personality people saw, polite, agreeable, easy to work with, was not entirely authentic. It was a performance shaped by anticipation. And performances become identities when repeated long enough. Daniel believed he was simply maintaining workplace professionalism. He did not recognize that something more expensive was being traded away. Autonomy, with the freedom to think and act without first seeking silent permission from the crowd. Day after day, the pattern strengthened. Weeks turned into months. Months turned into years. No confrontation forced him to question it. No crisis exposed the cost. But systems built on quiet negotiation always carry a hidden weakness. Eventually, the moment arrives when silence is no longer possible. A moment when the room turns toward you. When speaking becomes unavoidable. And if the mind has spent years protecting approval, that moment can become dangerous. Daniel did not know it yet. But the next major meeting on his calendar would force him into exactly that position. A conference room, 12 co-workers, one presentation, and a single mistake that would reveal, in front of everyone, how fragile his confidence really was. The humiliation was waiting. And once it happened, the quiet collapse of his identity would begin. And the meeting was scheduled for Tuesday morning at 9 o'clock. Daniel arrived 10 minutes early, laptop under his arm, coffee cooling in his hand. The conference room was already half full. Chairs scraped lightly against the floor as people settled around the long table. Fluorescent lights hummed above them, casting a dull white glow across the glass walls. He chose a seat near the middle. Not too visible. Not invisible either. Safe. Daniel opened his laptop and began reviewing the slides he had prepared the night before. The presentation was simple. A proposal for adjusting the workflow on a delayed project. Nothing revolutionary, just an improvement that would save time. He had spent hours rehearsing the wording, but rehearsing in private is not the same as speaking in public. His manager entered the room a moment later, carrying a tablet. A few others followed. Conversations bounced lightly across the table. Morning. Did you see the numbers from last quarter? Traffic was terrible today. Normal sounds, normal faces. But Daniel felt the familiar tightening in his chest. This meeting was different. Today, he had to speak. For weeks, he had noticed inefficiencies in the project timeline. Everyone complained about delays, but nobody addressed the underlying structure. Daniel had quietly redesigned the process and built a short presentation explaining the fix. He told himself this was an opportunity, but professional, constructive. His manager began the meeting. All right, let's get started. Updates moved quickly around the table. One person summarized metrics. Another discussed resource allocation. Daniel listened, pen tapping lightly against the table, waiting for his turn. Then his manager looked at him. Daniel, you mentioned you had something to show us. The room shifted. 12 pairs of eyes turned in his direction. For a brief moment, his mind went blank. Then he cleared his throat. Yeah, I put together a small proposal about the scheduling delays. He stood, connected his laptop to the screen, and the first slide appeared. A simple chart. Daniel began explaining the idea. At first, his voice sounded steady. He walked through the steps calmly. The logic was clear. He could feel the words forming naturally. But halfway through the explanation, someone interrupted. A coworker named Eric leaned back in his chair. Wait, Eric said. So you're basically suggesting we restructure the review cycle? Daniel paused. Yes, but the difference is... Eric cut him off again. Because we already talked about something similar last quarter. Several heads turned toward Eric. He stood up slowly, walked closer to the screen, and began speaking over Daniel's slide. Actually, if we just move the review stage here, Eric said, pointing at the chart, we can compress the entire process. The room grew more animated. People nodded. One coworker spoke up. That actually makes sense. Daniel stood there beside the screen, hands still resting on the laptop. Something strange was happening. Eric was describing the exact idea Daniel had been explaining seconds earlier, but now it sounded different, clearer, more confident. People leaned forward. His manager smiled. Good thinking, Eric. A few people chuckled lightly when Daniel tried to add something. Right, he said. That's basically what I was showing on the next slide. But the moment was already gone. Eric had captured the room. The conversation shifted around the table while Daniel stood quietly near the screen, invisible again inside his own presentation. Then it happened. While trying to regain the flow of the explanation, Daniel clicked forward too quickly and skipped several slides. Confused, he tried to navigate backward. The wrong chart appeared. Someone laughed softly. Another voice said, I think the slides are fighting you. The comment was meant as a joke, but laughter followed. Not cruel laughter, just casual, careless. Daniel forced a smile and fixed the slides, but the energy in the room had already changed. His confidence collapsed silently. The rest of the presentation passed quickly, barely noticed. When the meeting ended, people gathered their laptops and filed out. Eric clapped Daniel lightly on the shoulder. Good start, man. We'll refine it. Daniel nodded. Yeah, sounds good. But inside his chest, something felt different. Not anger, recognition. The humiliation was small by most standards. No shouting, no confrontation, just a quiet moment where his voice disappeared in front of others. But moments like that leave marks. That evening, Daniel sat alone on his couch, laptop glowing softly in the dim apartment. The meeting replayed in his mind again and again. Why didn't I speak up? Why didn't I defend the idea? Why did I let that happen? And the answers were uncomfortable. because approval still mattered more than truth, because conflict felt more dangerous than silence, because his mind had been trained to protect social comfort above all else. Around midnight, he opened a video lecture someone had shared online earlier that week. The title mentioned the legendary Japanese swordsman Miyamoto Musashi. Daniel clicked it without much thought. The lecture was calm, almost quiet. A historian discussed Musashi's philosophy of mental discipline. Then the speaker said something that froze Daniel's attention. In Japanese philosophy, the historian explained, there is a concept called Fudoshin. It means the immovable mind, a mental state where praise and criticism lose their ability to control your behavior. Daniel leaned forward. The speaker continued. Musashi warned that warriors who crave approval cannot reach this state. If your mind depends on other people's reactions, your actions no longer belong to you. Daniel felt something tighten in his chest. The words landed with uncomfortable precision. Because the man being described in that lecture was exactly the man he had been that morning. And once that realization appears, it cannot easily be ignored, which is when the real problem began. Because the lecture had not yet explained the cost of developing an immovable mind. And Daniel was about to learn that removing the need for approval requires destroying something first. His identity. Daniel did not close the video when the lecture ended. Most people would have. They would have absorbed the idea, nodded slightly, and moved on with their evening. Philosophy becomes entertainment when it never confronts behavior. A person hears something interesting, feels briefly inspired, and then returns to the same patterns the next morning. But Daniel felt something else, a recognition. The historian in the lecture spoke calmly, almost quietly, but the idea behind his words carried weight. In Japanese warrior culture, the speaker said, Fudoshin was considered a psychological necessity, not a virtue, not a personality trait. A necessity, because a mind influenced by approval cannot make reliable decisions. Daniel leaned closer to the screen. On the video, the historian showed an old illustration of a samurai standing calmly in front of an opponent, and the figure's expression was neutral, unmoved. The word itself, the historian continued, translates to immovable mind, but that translation is incomplete. Fudoshin describes a mind that does not fluctuate based on praise, criticism, fear, or approval. The emotional weather of the crowd becomes irrelevant. Daniel felt a strange tension in his chest, because everything about his daily behavior depended on the opposite. At work, he constantly measured reactions. Approval guided his speech, or disapproval softened his opinions. His personality adjusted like a mirror reflecting the expectations of whoever held authority in the room. The historian paused briefly before continuing. A warrior who depends on approval is already defeated. His opponent does not need to strike him. The crowd will control him instead. Daniel sat back slowly. The sentence felt uncomfortable, but it was also accurate. He thought about the meeting that morning. About the moment when Eric had interrupted him, and the moment when laughter filled the room after the slide mistake. He had not defended the idea, not because he lacked the knowledge, because the fear of social friction had overridden the truth he wanted to say. The lecture continued. A second speaker appeared on the screen. A Kyoto monk in simple robes, sitting on the floor of a quiet temple room. His voice carried the calm rhythm of someone used to silence. Approval, the monk said, is a psychological leash. Daniel frowned slightly, or the monk folded his hands. When a person begins craving validation, he continued, his actions stop belonging to him. Every choice becomes a negotiation with the crowd. Speak carefully, move carefully, protect the image. The monk lifted his eyes toward the camera. That is not freedom. Daniel felt something shift in his thinking. The monk continued speaking. Fudoshin does not mean arrogance. It does not mean ignoring other people. It means something more severe. It means the mind no longer requires permission to act. The room around Daniel felt unusually quiet. Outside his apartment window, distant traffic moved slowly along the street. The soft hum of engines mixed with the faint glow of city lights. On the screen, the monk spoke again. The reason few people reach Fudoshin is simple. They attempt to add it to their personality. Daniel listened carefully. But Fudoshin cannot be added, the monk said. It replaces. The word hung in the air. The monk continued calmly. If you want an immovable mind, the identity that seeks approval must disappear. The two cannot exist together. Daniel stared at the screen. Disappear. The idea felt extreme. The monk explained further. In ancient Japan, young warriors trained for years not only to master combat, but to master indifference to praise and insult. Since the 13th century, Zen teachers have warned students about the same weakness. When approval controls you, the crowd becomes your master. Daniel felt an uncomfortable thought forming. If this philosophy was true, then his entire adult personality had been built on a fragile foundation, not values, reactions. Modern science quietly supports this ancient observation. At one point in the lecture, the historian referenced research from MIT studying decision fatigue and social evaluation. The findings were simple. When the brain constantly calculates how others might judge us, the cognitive energy drains rapidly, decision-making becomes slower, confidence weakens, action delays. The brain begins choosing safety instead of clarity. Daniel understood that pattern immediately. It explained something he had never been able to describe before. The constant mental scanning, the hesitation before speaking, the small adjustments to tone and wording that appeared automatically during conversations. His brain had been running silent calculations all day, every day. Protect the social position, avoid embarrassment, maintain approval. The monk's voice returned. Fudoshin is not the removal of emotion, he said. It is the removal of dependency. Daniel replayed that sentence in his mind. Removal of dependency. That phrase landed with uncomfortable precision, because dependency meant something had control over you. And if approval controlled him, then every confident decision he thought he made was actually influenced by invisible pressure from the crowd. Or the monk's final words in the lecture were quiet, but direct. If a person wishes to practice the ancient Japanese system of Fudoshin, he must first observe a painful truth. Daniel leaned forward again. You cannot keep the identity that fears judgment. The screen faded to black as the lecture ended. The apartment fell silent. Daniel sat still on the couch for several minutes, staring at the reflection of his own face in the dark screen. The idea refused to leave his mind. An immovable mind, or a life where approval no longer controlled behavior. But the monk had been clear about the cost. The identity he currently lived with would have to collapse first. Most people hear that warning and immediately retreat, because losing the need for approval sounds empowering in theory, but terrifying in practice. Without approval, what protects you from criticism? Without approval, what guarantees social comfort? Without approval, how do you know if you are doing the right thing? Daniel sat quietly, thinking about those questions. Then he reached for his notebook. If the monk was correct, then the only way to test the philosophy was through behavior. And behavior begins with a trial. What Daniel did not realize yet was that the first 2 weeks of that trial would feel powerful, almost easy. The real resistance would come later. Because when a man stops seeking approval, the world doesn't quietly accept the change. The world reacts. And Daniel was about to discover that the moment he stopped negotiating, people around him would start pushing back. Daniel did not wake up the next morning feeling transformed. There was no dramatic surge of confidence, no sudden clarity. The same gray morning light filtered through the blinds of his apartment, and the same alarm vibrated on the nightstand beside his bed. But something subtle had changed. For the first time in years, Daniel had a rule to test. Not a motivational idea, not a vague intention, a rule. If the Japanese principle of Fudoshin required removing dependence on approval, then the only way to begin was simple. Stop negotiating with the crowd. He wrote the rule in his notebook before leaving for work. 2 weeks. No negotiation. That sentence looked small on paper, but in reality it meant something precise. Speak the idea when it appears. Stop explaining every decision. Do not soften opinions to protect comfort. And most importantly, stop feeding the machine that constantly measures approval. Before leaving the apartment, Daniel opened his phone and deleted 3 applications without hesitation. Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter. All 3 had been small sources of validation, notifications, likes, quiet signals that other people approved of his presence. He placed the phone down on the kitchen counter and stared at the empty screen. The silence felt strange. Then he grabbed his keys and left for work. One of the first tests arrived before noon. A routine planning meeting. Same conference room, same long table, same co-workers speaking over one another. Daniel felt the familiar reflex begin its quiet calculations. Who agrees? Who might disagree? Who holds authority? For years, his brain had answered those questions before he spoke. Today, he interrupted the process. When a colleague suggested a scheduling adjustment that Daniel knew would delay the project, the old instinct surfaced immediately. Stay quiet. But the rule was already written. No negotiation. Daniel leaned forward slightly. That timeline won't work, he said. The sentence came out more direct than he expected. The room grew still for a moment. A coworker looked at him. Why not? Daniel felt the pressure rising inside his chest. The mind's old habit was trying to soften the statement, to cushion it with explanations and apologies. Instead, he continued. Because the review stage will bottleneck the testing cycle, but we'll lose 3 days. The silence lasted a second longer than usual. Then someone nodded. Yeah, that's actually true. The meeting moved forward. Daniel felt something unusual as he sat back in his chair. Relief. Not because the room approved of his comment. Because he had spoken without negotiating first. The second test appeared later that afternoon. His manager asked him to revise a timeline report. Normally, Daniel would respond with something automatic. Sure, no problem. But the request required several hours of additional work that had nothing to do with his assigned responsibilities. The old instinct returned. Say yes, protect approval. Daniel paused. Then he spoke carefully. I can revise it, but it will push back the reporting update I'm already finishing. His manager looked at him. For a moment, Daniel expected tension, but the manager simply nodded. Okay, finish the update first. Another small victory. But that evening, Daniel walked home through the quiet streets with a strange mixture of excitement and unease. The system seemed simple. Speak honestly, stop negotiating, let the reaction happen. For the first few days, the experiment almost felt empowering. Day 1. 2 small moments of honesty. Day 2. 1 disagreement during a meeting. Day 3. He left a conversation without explaining his reasoning 3 times. The pattern continued. But something else began happening beneath the surface. Well, people noticed. During lunch on the 4th day, one co-worker tilted his head slightly. "You're different lately," she said. Daniel raised an eyebrow. "How?" She shrugged. "Just more direct." He nodded but said nothing. On day 6, an old friend named Marcus sent him a message after Daniel declined an invitation to a last-minute social event. "Man, you've been weird lately," Marcus wrote. Daniel stared at the message. The old instinct suggested a familiar response. Explain everything. Apologize. Protect the relationship. Instead, he typed a simple reply. "Just focusing on work this week." Marcus responded with a laughing emoji. "All right, Monk." Daniel closed the conversation. The comment lingered longer than he expected, because even small changes in behavior create ripples. By the end of the first week, Daniel noticed something else: the silence from his phone. Without social media notifications, without constant feedback loops of approval and reaction, his mind felt clearer. But clarity also exposes tension. Harvard behavioral researchers studying identity shifts have documented a pattern that appears whenever a person stops performing expected roles. The social group resists, not aggressively, subtly. Friends ask questions. Co-workers make jokes. The environment attempts to restore the previous version of the person. Daniel began sensing that pressure near the end of the 2nd week. A comment here, a raised eyebrow there. Nothing dramatic, but enough to create friction. One afternoon, while walking out of a meeting where he had calmly disagreed with a proposed budget adjustment, Marcus caught up with him in the hallway. Marcus worked in another department, but they had known each other for years. He leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "All right," Marcus said, half smiling. "What's going on with you lately?" Daniel looked at him. "What do you mean?" Marcus shrugged. "You're just different. Not in a bad way. Just different." Daniel said nothing. Marcus shook his head slightly. "Just don't turn into one of those guys who thinks he's better than everyone." The sentence landed quietly. Not hostile, but heavy. Daniel watched Marcus walk away. For the first time since starting the experiment, doubt crept into his mind. Was the discipline working? Or was he slowly isolating himself? That night he opened the notebook again. 2 weeks of non-negotiation. The rule was still there, but something new had appeared beneath it. Resistance. And Daniel did not yet realize that the real battle was only beginning. Because once identity begins to shift, the mind does not surrender quietly. Sooner or later, the old pattern fights back. And when it does, the collapse can feel even worse than the humiliation that started everything. The first 2 weeks of discipline felt controlled. Not easy, but controlled. Daniel had spoken more honestly than he had in years. The small decisions that once triggered hesitation now moved quickly. The rule had simplified everything. If approval tried to influence the decision, ignore it. Continue. But discipline trials always reveal something deeper after the initial momentum fades, because habits do not disappear when challenged. They wait. The relapse arrived quietly during the 3rd week. Monday morning. Another meeting. Same room, same long table, same dull white lights humming above the ceiling panels. As Daniel sat in his usual chair, notebook open, pen resting between his fingers. The agenda was routine. Timeline adjustments, resource allocation, and final approvals for a new product launch. His manager, Karen, stood near the screen presenting updates. Daniel listened calmly until the conversation turned toward the workflow system he had been helping redesign. Karen looked directly at him. "Daniel," she said, "we've reviewed your suggestions, but we think the previous structure is still safer for the timeline." The word safer carried quiet weight. Daniel felt the moment approaching. Under the new structure, delays would decrease. He knew that. The data supported it. The logic was simple. The old Daniel would have nodded. The disciplined version of Daniel should have defended the proposal. But something unexpected happened inside his chest. Karen continued speaking. "But let's keep the current process for now." A few co-workers nodded around the table. Daniel felt the familiar pressure rising, that invisible calculation his mind had performed for years. If you push back now, you create friction. If you disagree, the room may turn uncomfortable. The rule was still written in his notebook. No negotiation. But identity habits are patient, and in moments of authority pressure, they move quickly. Daniel spoke. "Yeah, that's fine," he said quietly, and the words left his mouth before he even recognized them. The room moved on instantly. Karen advanced the slide and continued the meeting. The decision passed without resistance. But Daniel felt something collapse internally, because he knew exactly what had happened. He had returned to negotiation. The meeting ended 20 minutes later. Chairs scraped across the floor as people packed their laptops. Casual conversations resumed. Someone joked about weekend plans. Then Daniel walked out of the room in silence. No one noticed the relapse. But he did. Outside the building, the afternoon air felt cold against his face. Traffic passed slowly along the street. People moved along the sidewalk carrying coffee cups and briefcases. Normal life. Yet inside his chest, something heavy remained. Because discipline is not measured by success, it is measured by the moments when failure appears. That night, Daniel sat alone in his apartment again, a notebook open on the coffee table. The same rule stared back at him from the page. 2 weeks. No negotiation. He had already broken it. The old identity had reappeared the moment authority challenged him. Daniel leaned back on the couch and closed his eyes. Something uncomfortable surfaced in his thinking. Maybe the monk in the lecture had been right. Approval-seeking was not just behavior. It was identity. Years of quiet reinforcement had built a reflex stronger than simple intention. Or the mind had learned to protect social stability the same way it protects physical safety. Changing that system would require something deeper than temporary discipline. Daniel opened the video lecture again and searched through the recording until he found the monk speaking. There was a section he had barely noticed before. The monk was explaining another Japanese concept connected to Fudoshin. "Shoshin," the monk said softly. "The beginner's mind." Daniel listened carefully. "In the Japanese philosophy of training," the monk continued, "progress is not a straight line. Beginners expect perfection. Masters expect repetition." The monk folded his hands calmly. "Failure is not evidence that the system does not work. Failure is evidence that training has begun." Daniel felt the words land slowly. The monk continued. "In Shoshin, every mistake becomes information. The student returns to the discipline without shame, without drama, without abandoning the path." Daniel paused the video. For a long moment, he stared at the dark screen. The relapse in the meeting replayed in his memory. The hesitation, the quiet surrender. But something about the monk's explanation changed the way he saw the moment. If the habit was identity, then one relapse did not mean the discipline had failed. It meant the identity was fighting. And identity always fights when it begins losing control. Daniel picked up the notebook again. Underneath the original rule, he wrote a second line. Return immediately. No shame, no analysis, just return. The Japanese philosophy of Shoshin did not promise comfort. It promised continuity. But another question now hovered over the entire experiment, a deeper one. Because the real test of transformation is not whether you can practice discipline when it feels empowering. The real test is whether you continue when the world stops approving of the change. Daniel closed the notebook slowly, and he knew something now that he had not understood 3 weeks earlier. If he continued this path, the resistance would not only come from inside his own mind, it would come from the people around him. And when that pressure arrives, the temptation to return to approval becomes even stronger, which meant the next phase of discipline required something new. Not bigger actions, smaller ones. A method older than samurai warfare itself. The Japanese system called Kaizen, and it would force Daniel to rebuild his identity one microscopic decision at a time. Daniel did not attempt another dramatic change. The relapse had already revealed something important. Identity patterns built over decades do not disappear because a person decides they should. They resist. They adapt. They quietly wait for moments of pressure to reassert themselves. If Daniel tried to overpower the habit directly, the same collapse would happen again. So he changed the strategy. See, not bigger discipline, smaller discipline. The next morning, he opened the notebook again and wrote a single word beneath the previous rules. Kaizen. The Japanese principle of Kaizen is often misunderstood as a productivity strategy. In reality, it is something deeper. Kaizen means continuous improvement through microscopic change. Instead of attempting dramatic transformation, the system focuses on actions so small they bypass psychological resistance. Samurai training manuals referenced similar logic centuries ago. Large declarations impress the ego. Small, consistent actions reshape identity. Daniel read the word again. Kaizen. The discipline no longer required heroic moments. It required repetition. One action, one sentence, one decision at a time. The first rule was simple. During every meeting, disagree once. Not aggressively, not dramatically. Just once. A single honest correction or alternative suggestion. For it enough to interrupt the old reflex of silence. The second rule was even smaller. When ending a conversation, stop explaining. Daniel had developed a habit of over-explaining his reasoning. If he declined an invitation, he added extra sentences to soften the decision. If he finished a discussion at work, he would often justify his position again before leaving. Now the rule was simple. Speak, stop. No additional defense. The third rule targeted something more subtle. But stop defending small decisions. If someone questioned a minor choice, a scheduling preference, a workflow adjustment, Daniel would answer once and then allow the conversation to end. No debate, no justification loop. 3 small behaviors. Nothing dramatic. But Kaizen operates like water shaping stone. Small pressure repeated daily eventually changes structure. The first week felt almost quiet. Daniel disagreed during meetings without announcing it as a major moment, just a sentence. I think that step may slow the timeline. Or, that adjustment might create another delay. Sometimes people accepted the observation immediately, sometimes they ignored it. But the rule was not about controlling reactions, it was about training action. By the second week, something subtle began happening. The hesitation before speaking started shrinking, not disappearing completely, but shrinking. The brain began learning that disagreement did not trigger catastrophe. The room did not explode. The authority figures did not immediately retaliate. Most conversations simply continued. Daniel noticed another change outside of work. Without the constant feedback loops of social media, the mind felt strangely quieter. Evenings in his apartment no longer included endless scrolling through reactions and opinions. The silence was uncomfortable at first, then peaceful. Yale psychology researchers studying habit automation describe a similar process. When behaviors are repeated in consistent contexts, the brain gradually moves them from conscious effort into automatic patterns. Identity follows behavior, not the other way around. Daniel began seeing evidence of that principle around day 45. One afternoon during a meeting, a colleague proposed a rushed adjustment to the project timeline. The idea would have created several logistical problems. Before Daniel even finished analyzing the suggestion, his hand lifted slightly. "Whereas that will cause a review bottleneck," he said calmly. The room paused. Someone asked why. Daniel explained in 2 sentences. The group reconsidered the proposal and moved on. Only afterward did Daniel notice something strange. He had spoken without calculating approval first. The action had happened automatically. The mind had started rewiring. But Kaizen carries an unexpected side effect. When internal negotiation disappears, silence becomes different. During the early weeks of discipline, silence felt like restraint. The brain was constantly resisting the urge to soften statements or apologize. Now silence felt deliberate. When Daniel stopped explaining himself, conversations ended more quickly. When he declined invitations with simple responses, the moment passed without long discussions. And when meetings finished, he sometimes left the room without replaying every sentence he had spoken. The quiet space inside his mind began expanding. But that new silence created a different confrontation. Because when approval stops guiding behavior, something else must replace it. Clarity. Clarity about values. Clarity about decisions. Clarity about identity. Without approval as a compass, a person must begin trusting internal judgment. And that realization created a new tension Daniel had not expected. Because independence always changes the environment around you. By day 60, the differences in his behavior were becoming visible, not dramatic, but noticeable. Co-workers paused slightly when Daniel spoke. Friends asked fewer casual questions about his opinions. The subtle performance he once maintained for social comfort had disappeared. And when performances end, people begin seeing the person underneath. Which means reactions change. Some people respect it. Some people become uncomfortable. Daniel did not yet know which group his environment would belong to. But the first signs of tension had already started appearing. A comment here, a joke there, a subtle shift in tone when conversations turned serious. The Kaizen reconstruction was working. His mind was becoming quieter, more decisive, less dependent. But discipline always carries a social cost. And soon Daniel would discover that the immovable mind does not only change how you behave, it changes how the world behaves toward you. Because when approval stops controlling a man, the people who once benefited from his compliance begin noticing the difference. And not all of them welcome it. The real test of Fudoshin was approaching. And it would arrive not through a single dramatic confrontation, but through something more destabilizing. A slow earthquake in Daniel's social world. 6 months is a dangerous amount of time for a new identity to grow. Long enough for habits to solidify. Long enough for people around you to notice the difference. But also long enough for the environment to begin pushing back. Daniel did not wake up one morning and suddenly realize the transformation had happened. There was no ceremony marking the shift. No dramatic declaration that the old personality had disappeared. The changes were gradual, but by the 6th month, they had become impossible to ignore. Inside meetings, Daniel spoke without hesitation. not aggressively, not constantly, but with a calm certainty that had not existed before. When he had something useful to say, he said it. When he did not, that he remained quiet without feeling the need to perform agreement. The room had adjusted to this. At first, co-workers had reacted with curiosity, then mild confusion. Now they simply expected it. One afternoon during a project review, Karen paused while presenting an update and glanced toward Daniel. "What do you think?" she asked. 6 months earlier, that question would have triggered a rush of internal calculations. Daniel would have scanned the room, gauged reactions, softened his opinion before speaking. Now he simply looked at the chart. "The timeline is optimistic," he said calmly. "Testing will likely push it back 2 days." The room absorbed the statement. Karen nodded slowly. "Fair point." The conversation moved forward. Moments like that had started happening regularly. But the real transformation was not happening in conference rooms. It was happening in the quiet spaces between conversations. Daniel no longer felt the impulse to explain himself after every decision. When discussions ended, he allowed silence to exist. When someone disagreed with him, he listened without rushing to defend his position. Approval had stopped acting as the central signal in his nervous system. And when that dependency disappears, something unusual happens. Clarity replaces hesitation. Daniel noticed it in the way people now listened when he spoke. Not because he talked more, but because his words no longer sounded tentative. The endless, softening language had vanished. No nervous laughter, no trailing explanations, just statements. But social environments rarely change without friction. The first visible crack appeared during a weekend dinner with Marcus. They had met at the same restaurant they often visited after work. The place was loud, crowded, full of overlapping conversations and clinking glasses. Marcus leaned back in his chair and studied Daniel with a faint smile. "You know something?" he said. Daniel raised an eyebrow. "What?" "You've changed a lot this year." Daniel sipped his drink. "People keep saying that." Marcus shrugged. "Well, it's true." For a moment, the conversation hung in neutral space. Then Marcus continued. "You used to be easier to read." Daniel tilted his head slightly. "How so?" Marcus hesitated. "Before, you kind of went with the flow. And now it's like you've got your own system or something." Daniel said nothing. Marcus laughed lightly, but there was an edge behind it. "Just don't turn into one of those guys who thinks he's smarter than everyone." The sentence landed the same way Marcus's earlier comment months ago had. Not openly hostile, but not comfortable either. Daniel noticed something important in that moment. The old reflex to reassure Marcus did not appear. 6 months earlier, he would have responded immediately. "I don't know, man. That's not what I mean. I'm not trying to be different." Now he simply held Marcus's gaze. "I'm just being more honest," Daniel said. Marcus shrugged again and changed the subject. But the moment revealed something that ancient Japanese philosophy had warned about centuries earlier. When a person stops performing familiar social roles, the group feels the disruption. People who once benefited from your compliance begin questioning the change. And the samurai texts describing Fudoshin mention this phenomenon directly. When the mind becomes immovable, the reactions of others become unpredictable. Some people respect the stability. Others interpret it as arrogance. Daniel began noticing both reactions. At work, Karen gradually gave him more responsibility. His clarity during discussions made him useful in decision-making situations. Projects that once passed him by now arrived at his desk. "You're good at cutting through the noise," she told him one afternoon. But outside work, the reactions were more complicated. Certain friends invited him out less often. Conversations that once flowed easily sometimes ended early. Without the subtle performance of constant agreement, the dynamic had changed. Daniel felt the social tension, but did not rush to repair it. Because the Japanese method of Fudoshin teaches something simple, approval is not stability. Truth is, and truth always rearranges relationships. By month 6, the transformation inside Daniel's mind had become undeniable. The mental scanning that once governed his behavior had faded. Praise felt lighter. Criticism felt quieter. The emotional weather of the crowd no longer controlled his decisions. But the philosophy of Fudoshin includes one final warning. Even after transformation begins, the old identity remains somewhere beneath the surface, waiting. Moments of pressure can still awaken it. Which means the final test of the immovable mind is not whether you can build it. The final test is whether you can keep it. When the world shifts, when approval disappears, when criticism returns, Daniel was about to face that test. And the answer would determine whether the transformation he built over 6 months would survive an entire year, or collapse the moment the crowd stopped cooperating. 1 year can pass quietly when life looks ordinary from the outside. Daniel Sato still woke up at 6:45 in the same apartment. The same alarm vibrated against the nightstand. The same gray morning light slipped through the blinds. Coffee brewed in the same small kitchen. The commute followed the same roads through the city. If someone examined his life from a distance, nothing dramatic had changed. Same job, same desk, same office building with fluorescent lights humming softly above rows of cubicles. But identity does not always transform through visible milestones. Sometimes the entire operating system changes beneath the surface, while the environment stays the same. A year earlier, Daniel had entered that building each morning with a mind trained to scan the room. Who approves? Who disagrees? Who holds authority? Every conversation carried invisible calculations. Every meeting involved silent negotiations. His voice softened automatically in the presence of disagreement, though his opinions bent slightly to maintain social harmony. The crowd had quietly owned his behavior. Now something different existed inside his mind. The change revealed itself in small moments. During meetings, Daniel no longer felt the familiar tightening in his chest when attention turned toward him. When someone asked his opinion, he simply looked at the information in front of him and spoke. No scanning, no rehearsing, no silent calculation of reactions. If someone disagreed, he listened. What if the criticism made sense? He adjusted. If it did not, he remained still. Praise and disapproval moved through the room like background noise. Information. Nothing more. One afternoon, Karen approached his desk with a folder of reports. "We're restructuring the project oversight roles," she said. Daniel looked up. "I'd like you to lead the next review cycle." The promotion was modest. No ceremony, no dramatic recognition. But it represented something important. Bo's authority had begun trusting the clarity of his decisions. The irony was almost invisible. The more Daniel stopped chasing approval, the more credibility appeared naturally. Ancient Japanese philosophy describes this effect as a side consequence of Fudoshin. When a person stops performing for validation, their actions begin reflecting internal stability rather than social calculation. People notice, not because the person tries to impress them, but because the absence of hesitation creates quiet authority. Daniel accepted the new responsibility without excitement or anxiety, just acknowledgement. "All right," he said. Karen nodded and returned to her office. The moment passed quickly. A year earlier, Daniel would have replayed the conversation repeatedly. Was his tone correct? Did he appear confident enough? Should he have thanked her more enthusiastically? Now the thoughts did not appear. The mind moved forward. Through that evening, Daniel walked home through the same streets he had walked hundreds of times before. Traffic lights glowed red and green across the intersection. People passed carrying bags, talking on phones, living ordinary lives. Nothing about the environment had changed, but the internal experience of walking through it had. His mind felt quieter, not empty, clear. The habit of seeking witnesses for every action had disappeared. And that is where the silent lesson of Miyamoto Musashi finally revealed itself. Musashi wrote that the greatest weakness of most men is not fear of danger. It is fear of judgment. A warrior obsessed with reputation cannot fight freely. Every movement becomes calculated for appearance rather than effectiveness. So Musashi trained his mind to remove the audience entirely. The duel exists, the opponent exists, but the crowd disappears. But Daniel had slowly done the same thing inside his everyday life. Conversations happened, decisions happened, reactions from others still occurred. But the invisible audience that once monitored every step no longer controlled him. Approval had become irrelevant to action. And when that dependency disappears, something unexpected happens. Freedom does not feel dramatic. It feels quiet. No internal negotiation. No constant rehearsal of possible criticism. Just movement, decision, action. 1 year earlier, Daniel had watched a lecture explaining the Japanese principle of Fudoshin and heard a sentence that unsettled him. You cannot keep the identity that fears judgment. At the time, the statement felt extreme. Now it felt obvious. The identity that once depended on approval had quietly dissolved through repetition, relapse, discipline, and small acts of independence. Not through a single moment of courage, through hundreds of microscopic decisions. Kaizen. And when that process finished its work, the result was simple. Daniel spoke when something needed to be said. He remained silent when it did not. Other people's reactions passed through the room like weather, no longer controlling the climate of his mind. Musashi's silent lesson had never been about combat. It was about sovereignty, a life where decisions belong to you, and the moment approval becomes irrelevant. That life finally begins. But if this story forced you to recognize something inside your own behavior, then do not leave it as entertainment. Subscribe to the channel and turn on the bell so you do not miss future videos that break down ancient discipline systems and the psychological laws behind real inner mastery. Then do one final action. Write a single public declaration in the comments. Not a speech, not a paragraph. Just the smallest approval-seeking habit you are ending starting today. Maybe it is speaking honestly in meetings. Maybe it is posting your work without waiting for permission. Maybe it is stopping the endless need to explain yourself to people who never asked. Write it clearly. Public commitments change the way the mind treats decisions. Once your declaration exists in the open, hesitation becomes harder to justify. And the next time approval tries to control your behavior, you will remember that the negotiation already ended.